Hi, I'm Dave Vickers and welcome to the Photo Show. In today's episode, we're looking at a big announcement from Nikon, the D6. This week, Nikon has made an announcement about a new top-of-the-range flagship DSLR model, the D6, which will be the replacement for their D5 model. In recent years, Nikon have made several development announcements, mainly around the D850 and the Z series of cameras. And on both those occasions, the full details and the release of the cameras came within a month of the development announcement. But I don't think it's going to be the same this time with the Nikon D6. I actually think the full details and release of the D6 won't be until early 2020. One of the main reasons for this is the D6 is going to be aimed mainly at sports photographers, and Nikon are going to want it available to be used at the Olympics in 2020. With the Olympics taking place in Tokyo, they're going to want sports photographers to be able to use it for the games. With the rise of mirrorless cameras over the last few years, there's a good chance that the D6 could be the last top-flight DSLR professional camera that Nikon produce. And there's a certain irony in the fact that the last film professional camera that Nikon produced was the F6. And it could possibly be the same, that the D6 is the end of this line as well. Very few details have been released about the D6. One image has emerged, and if you compare it to the previous model, the D5, the bodies look very similar. There are a couple of slight differences. On where the Mose dial sits, the dome on the camera looks slightly taller. The scoop around the vertical shutter button looks slightly more pronounced. And there's a line that runs across the top of the viewfinder, almost looking like it's a pop-up flash. But you wouldn't have a pop-up flash on a camera of this level. So I'm thinking that the line across there has something to do with built-in Wi-Fi on the D6. One of the few details that has emerged about the D6 is going to have built-in image stabilization. Now, this only leaves two options on a DSLR. The first option is the image stabilization is only going to be available for shooting video, because the mirror on a DSLR is in the way of the sensor and won't enable it to move and shift to image stabilize. The other option is that Nikon's going to be using some sort of translucent mirror, similar to those found on some of the Sony DSLRs, and this would allow the light to pass through the mirror and the sensor to be able to shift to image stabilize during still photography. Now, with so few details available, I thought what we'd do is something that we've done before on the Photo Show. We did it with the D850 and we did it with the Z series of cameras, which is for me to give my best guesses about what the specifications for the D6 is going to be. So, coming up now, we have our Nikon D6 guessifications. So let's start with the sensor. Now the D6 is the flagship DSLR model for Nikon, so it's going to be full frame. So we're looking at a full frame sensor. At the moment, the D5 has a 20.8 megapixel sensor. And then you've got the D850 full frame, which has a 45.7 megapixel sensor. With the D6 being aimed mainly at sports photographers, personally, I can't see them going for the massive large sensor. I can't see that it's got that much use in that area. Personally, I think that Nikon are going to go with something between a 24 and 30 megapixel sensor on the D6. Now, I could be wrong, and they could throw in the large sensor from the D850, the 45.7 megapixel sensor. But to be honest, in the area that this is aiming at, I think that could be overkill. The D6 will have dual X-Speed processors. This will speed up all the operations and also increase the buffer size for images. ISO range on the D6 I can see staying very similar to that on the D5, which is ISO 100 up to the crazy ISO 1,000,02400. I can't see the ISO coming down to ISO 64 as in the D850. In sports photography that's not really going to be that much use, but I could be wrong and it may be the same ISO range as the D850. But for now I'm going to say the ISO range is going to stay the same as the D5, ISO 100 to ISO 1,000,02400. Shutter speed. Now, I think the maximum shutter speed on the D6 is going to be 1/8,000th of a second. I think that's about the maximum that is technically possible with a DSLR. Now, frame rate, I would expect that to rise. The D5 has a frame rate of 12 frames per second, and I would expect the D6 to come up somewhere nearer to 20 frames per second. But I'm not sure if that's actually technically possible with a DSLR, with the mirror having to move out the way between each shot. 12 frames per second on the D5, I'm saying possibly up to about 20 frames per second on the D6. Autofocus is supposed to be improved on the D6 as well. The D5 and the D850 currently have 153 autofocus points, but I would expect that to raise in the D6 model. And possibly there may be the addition of the phase detection autofocus that you find on the Z series of cameras as well. Being a top-end professional DSLR camera, the Nikon D6 will have dual card slots. But on the D6, they're actually going to have dual CF Express card slots. And that makes me wonder what's going to happen with the XQD cards that we used in the D5 and the D850. If Nikon are abandoning those in their top flight camera, has the QXD card seen its day? But the D6 is going to have dual card slots, both CF Express. Video wise, I'd expect the D6 to inherit the same video system as you find in the D850, which will shoot 4K using the full width of the sensor. That said though, I don't know how many people would be buying a D6 to use it as a video option. I think it's much more as a sports photography and possibly wildlife photography camera. Price wise, being top of the range professional DSLR, it's not going to be cheap. I would expect the D6 to come in somewhere around the $7,000, £7,000 mark for the body only. That said, Nikon are already discounting the D5, so they're obviously expecting a market for the D6 when it is released. The main question is, do you think that the D6 is going to be Nikon's last top-of-the-range professional DSLR camera? With mirrorless cameras taking over the market, with their faster shutter speeds, faster frame rates, lighter size, they're almost ideally placed to take over the sports photography market, which the D6 is aimed at. And what do you think the specifications for the D6 should be? Do you think that Nikon should jam-pack this camera with the best they have to offer, the largest sensor, the best autofocus system they can? Or should they just tailor it to the market they're aiming for with the sports photographers? Let me know in the comments below what you think about the specifications that I've guessed at for the Nikon D6. It'd be really interesting once the camera's released and we've got more details, we'll make another video and compare what the actual specifications are as to what I predicted they might be on this video. But for now, I'm Dave Vickers, this is The Photo Show, thanks for watching, see you next time.